The palace of Zereth Prime trembled as Queen Valeth returned from the outer systems, her arrival marked by thunderous engines and a psychic pressure that bent servants to their knees. She was ancient by human reckoning, ruthless by galactic standard, and feared because she never made mistakes twice. Her absence had lasted only hours, yet the moment her feet touched the crystalline floor, she sensed a fracture in the careful order she imposed upon her empire. It was subtle, almost ignorable, but Valeth had survived centuries by trusting instinct over comfort. She dismissed her escort and moved alone through the inner corridors, her thoughts fixed on the royal nursery. Her triplets were not merely heirs. They were symbols of continuity in a species that ruled through dominance and discipline. They were guarded, monitored, isolated from weakness. Valeth believed distance forged strength, and strength ensured survival. Still, the unease followed her, tightening like an unseen claw around her mind. The doors to the nursery stood sealed, as they should have been, yet faint sound leaked through the barriers. Valeth paused. The noise was not crying. It was softer, irregular, and unmistakably alive. Laughter. The sound struck her with disorienting force, because it did not belong there. Her children were never loud. They were trained to be composed, even in infancy. With a sharp gesture, she opened the doors. A human sat on the floor. He wore a janitor's uniform, dull and worn, its fabric stained by chemicals and time. One child slept against his chest, breathing slow and steady. Another clung to his knee, eyes wide with fascination. The third grasped his finger with surprising strength, tail flicking in contentment. The human spoke quietly, weaving a simple story in a low, steady voice, as though the universe beyond that room did not exist. Valeth's psychic aura surged, cracking the air with restrained fury. Guards rushed in, weapons raised, awaiting the order that would end the human's life. Yet the children did not cry. They shifted, murmured, and remained calm, as if the storm towering before them were nothing more than a shadow passing over light. The human looked up slowly. His face carried exhaustion, fear, and something else Valeth did not expect. Resolve. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. They were alone. The simplicity of the statement unsettled her more than any plea. Valeth stepped closer, towering over him, her eyes burning with lethal promise. "No human enters this chamber," she said. "No human touches what belongs to the throne." He nodded once. "I know. Then explain why you still breathe." "I heard them crying," the human replied. "I couldn't leave." His words echoed through the chamber. Valeth studied the children, searching for distress, for harm, for any sign of contamination. She found none. Their heartbeats were slow, synchronized, peaceful, a state they rarely achieved under formal supervision. "What is your designation?" she asked. "Elias," he answered. "Maintenance worker, lower sector." A disposable life, one among millions, and yet he had crossed every boundary her laws enforced. "You understand the punishment," Valeth said. "Yes." He did not move away. Instead, he adjusted his grip so the sleeping child would not slip. The act was instinctive, uncalculated. Valeth felt something unfamiliar coil in her chest, sharp and unwelcome. "Why are they quiet?" she demanded. Elias hesitated, then met her gaze again. "Because someone stayed with them." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Valeth realized, with a flicker of unease, that she had left them alone intentionally, believing solitude would harden them. Instead, it had frightened them enough that a human janitor had become their refuge. She dismissed the guards with a gesture that shocked everyone present. The doors closed, sealing queen and human within the nursery. "For this moment," Valeth said, voice low and dangerous, "your fate is undecided." Elias exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving the children. She moved closer until her shadow covered him completely, studying the tremor in his hands that betrayed fear he refused to show. This human was not brave in the way warriors were brave. His courage was quieter, rooted in stubborn care rather than defiance. Valeth searched his thoughts with a careful probe and found no schemes. No ambition, only concern braided with exhaustion. He expected to die and had accepted it. That acceptance disturbed her. Fear was the foundation of obedience, yet Elias acted without hope of reward. Valeth wondered how many others like him existed beneath her rule, unseen and underestimated. The children shifted again. one emitting a soft sound of contentment that resonated within her. She understood this moment would not fade. Outside, the Empire waited. Inside, something had begun to fracture. It was a question of power versus compassion. And the answer, whatever it became, would redefine them both forever in silence. Veleth did not strike him. That alone unsettled the balance of the room. Elias felt it in the stillness, in the way the guards waited without moving, in the careful way the queen studied him as though he were a puzzle rather than prey. She circled slowly, her presence pressing against his thoughts, testing for deceit, ambition, fear. She found fear, yes, but it was not centered on himself. Each time her gaze shifted toward the children, his concern sharpened, protective and immediate. "You crossed forbidden thresholds," Veleth said. "You defied law, instinct, and survival." "I followed a sound," Elias replied. "Crying doesn't understand laws." Her eyes narrowed. "You speak as though that excuses you." "It doesn't," he said quietly. "It explains me." The simplicity of the answer frustrated her. Elias had been trained by defeat, shaped by loss, and stripped of illusions. He had nothing left to bargain with except truth. Veleth sensed it, and the realization angered her more than lies ever could. Her empire was built on leverage. This human possessed none. "Why were you in the upper levels at all?" she demanded. "Ventilation purge," Elias said. "The air in this sector is filtered differently. Higher purity, higher priority. For my children," Veleth said. "Yes." The admission settled heavily between them. Veleth recalled dismissing the caretakers earlier, irritated by their hesitation, convinced that solitude would encourage independence. She had not returned their calls. She had not checked the nursery feeds. For the first time, responsibility pressed against her pride. The children stirred as her thoughts sharpened. One whimpered, sensing tension. Elias responded instantly, shifting, lowering his voice, murmuring reassurance without looking away from the queen. The child relaxed. Veleth watched the exchange closely, disturbed by how naturally it unfolded. "You assume familiarity," she said. "I assume need," Elias answered. They needed someone. The word struck deeper than accusation. Veleth felt an echo of memory, distant and unwelcome, of her own youth within stone halls, where strength had been praised and comfort dismissed as weakness. She had survived. Many had not. Alarms shattered the fragile calm. Crimson light flooded the nursery as the palace defense grid activated. A voice echoed through the corridors, sharp with urgency, announcing an internal breach. Veleth's attention snapped outward, mind racing through tactical possibilities. Treachery always followed moments of perceived vulnerability. The children cried now, frightened by the noise. Elias tightened his hold instinctively, shielding them with his body. Veleth hesitated, torn between duty and something newly fragile. The choice lasted only a heartbeat, yet it felt like an eternity. "Remain," she commanded Elias. "Do not leave this room." "I wasn't planning to," he said. She extended one clawed hand and hesitated before placing one child into his arms, the gesture shocking even herself. The guards stiffened, disbelief rippling through them. Veleth silenced them with a thought. "If harm comes to them," she said, "your species will suffer for it." Elias nodded once. "If I fail them, I deserve it." The queen turned and strode from the nursery, sealing the doors behind her as the sounds of battle grew nearer. Elias sat on the floor, heart pounding, surrounded by royal luxury that felt suddenly meaningless. He listened to distant impacts, to shouts and weapons fire, and focused on the warmth of the small lives pressed against him. Time stretched. Debris rattled the walls. At one point, the lights flickered and failed, plunging the nursery into darkness. Elias did not panic. He spoke softly, telling a story about stars that watched over travelers, about light that endured even when hidden. The children listened, breaths evening, trust unbroken. When the doors finally opened again, smoke drifted through the corridor. Veleth stood there, armor scarred, eyes blazing with victory and exhaustion. Her gaze went immediately to her children. They were safe. They were calm. Elias looked up at her, blood seeping from a cut along his brow, and waited. Something irreversible settled between them. The battle had ended, but a greater conflict had only begun. Veleth stepped inside and closed the doors behind her, shutting out the chaos of the palace. She regarded Elias not as a subordinate now, but as a variable she had not accounted for. The empire outside still obeyed her will, Yet here, in this quiet room, authority felt different. It demanded reflection rather than command. Elias lowered his eyes at last, exhaustion overtaking resolve, but he did not release the children. Vaelith realized he trusted her enough to rest, and that trust was heavier than any crown. She understood that when dawn came, nothing would return to what it had been, and that the consequences of this moment would echo far beyond these walls. The future waited, fragile and dangerous, shaped by choices neither of them could undo ever again now. Days passed before Elias was summoned again, though time moved differently now. The palace whispered about him, about the human who had not died, about the queen who had hesitated. When he entered the inner chamber, guards no longer shoved him forward. They watched him instead, uncertain. Vaelith stood near the window, gazing over a city that obeyed her without question, yet felt newly distant. "You protected what was mine," she said without turning. "Not because you were commanded, but because you chose to." Elias kept his hands visible, posture respectful but unbowed. "I did what anyone should." "Anyone did not," Vaelith replied. She faced him, studying the scars left by falling debris. "You were injured." "You remained?" "I stayed because they were afraid," he said. "Fear doesn't care who you are." The truth settled between them. Vaelith dismissed the guards and the chamber fell quiet. For the first time, she allowed herself to observe Elias without threat clouding her perception. He was small, fragile by her standards, yet something within him had endured conquest without hardening into cruelty. That resilience intrigued her. "My empire is strong," she said. "It has endured because weakness is removed." "And yet," Elias said carefully, "your children were weakest when they were alone." The words were dangerous. Vaelith felt the instinct to punish rise, then recede. She remembered their calm breathing, their trust. Strength, she realized, had many shapes. "What would your people do differently?" she asked. Elias hesitated, surprised by the question. "We wouldn't rule the way you do. We protect what can't protect itself. We stay when it's easier to leave." Vaelith turned back to the city. Towers gleamed like blades, beautiful and cold. She saw suddenly the cost of that beauty, paid quietly by countless lives beneath her notice. The realization did not break her pride, but it bent it. Change began not with proclamation, but with permission. Human families were allowed to reunite. Restrictions loosened. Work became choice instead of sentence. The empire did not collapse. It adjusted, strained, then stabilized. Vaelith watched closely, ready to reverse course, but she did not need to. Elias was given a role that defied category. He was not elevated as a symbol, nor hidden as a mistake. He remained near the children, teaching, watching, listening. They grew curious, compassionate, unafraid to question. Vaelith observed them and learned alongside them, confronting habits carved by centuries. Years passed. The triplets matured into leaders shaped by two worlds. When Vaelith finally stepped away from the throne, the announcement shocked the system she ruled. She did not name a single successor. She named three, bound by trust rather than fear. On the day of transition, Elias stood beside them, not kneeling, not commanding, simply present. Vaelith met his gaze one last time. Gratitude passed between them without words. The empire endured, transformed, no longer silent. And somewhere within its vast reach, a simple truth took root, waiting to be remembered again whenever power forgot its purpose. It lived in classrooms where human and alien children learned together, in halls where voices were no longer hushed by fear. It lived in the way leaders listened before commanding, and in the pause that preceded violence. Elias returned often to the nursery, now a place of light rather than isolation. The children, no longer small, remembered who had stayed and why that mattered. Vaelith did not become gentle, nor did the empire forget how to fight. Strength remained, but it was tempered by awareness. The queen understood. At last that domination without care was merely destruction delayed. Elias never sought recognition, yet his presence altered the rhythm of power. He spoke when silence would have been easier, and that willingness reshaped futures he would never see. As the stars turned, stories spread beyond Zyrith Prime. They were altered, exaggerated, misunderstood, but the core endured. A human had been seen as more than expendable. An empire had chosen reflection over reflex. Those stories traveled quietly, seeding doubt in places where fear once ruled alone. Elias aged as humans do while the Empire continued. The triplets would outlive him. But they carried his influence forward, teaching others that authority, gained through compassion, endured longer than any conquest. When Elias finally withdrew from public life, it was without ceremony. He had never wanted one. In quieter years, Valeth would sometimes watch the city and remember a moment when certainty fractured. She did not regret it. Power had been her birthright, but understanding had been earned. The future unfolded not as conquest, but as stewardship, demanding vigilance rather than domination. The story did not end there. It continued wherever someone chose to stay when leaving was easier, wherever strength bent toward mercy. The universe watched, patient, waiting to see which example would be followed.